Alright, Sly Cooper 2, Band of Thieves. Finally, this channel is starting to feel like a real active channel, but anyways, as I said in my previous video, I'm more familiar with the second and third game than I was with the first game, which I really did not remember anything about, and was actually surprised to find out that the game is as good. No, it's even better than I not remembered it. But anyways, with that said, I actually had the most time with Sly 2, even though I never beat it as a kid. And the reason I never beat it as a kid is because this game is long. Like, really long. But anyways, with that said, let's find out how long with history first. Now, while Sly 2 was released on September 14th, 2004, I did not really get my hands on the game until the year after that in 2005. I know this because I remember that shortly after playing Sly 2, I got Sly 3. In fact, Sly 3 is the reason why I never managed to beat Sly 2, but I will get into that as we dig deeper into the game. So what was public opinion on the game? Well, the game received critical acclaim and is often regarded as one of the best PS2 games of all time. Now, do I agree with that sentiment? Well, let's find out by starting with the story. Sly 2 takes place 2 years after the events of the first game. After Clockwerk's defeat, his body parts were placed in a museum instead of somehow not melting in lava, and as such the Sly Gang attempts to steal the Clockwerk parts in fear of someone putting the old bird back together. Upon getting to the room, thanks to the help of his friend, Sly discovers that the Clockwerk parts had already been stolen, and that Inspector Carmelita along with Constable Neela have been waiting for the criminals who stole the parts to come back to the scene of the crime. And what's their logic?
Whereas you crooks are so predictable. You always return to the scene of the crime.
And yes, as you heard, Carmelita has a new voice that I honestly can't stand. She went from having a sexy accent in the first game to having the most generic female voice ever. The only female voice that's even more generic is your typical Lara Croftian seductive British accented voice, where the voice actor would try to say everything in a seductive way, even something as mundane as scrambled eggs. Thankfully though, she doesn't speak much throughout the game, since Sly does the voiceovers for the animated cutscenes. In almost every cutscene, it's Sly's voice we hear, not the cast. Speaking of which, when Sly talks during the comm sections, you can definitely tell that it's much better than the first game, and that's one of the major positives you hear about the game, and it's that the gang simply feel closer than the first game. Okay, I'm getting a little uncomfortable here. Anyway, I will definitely get into the script and voice acting in a bit. Sly's delivery is all well and good, but am I the only one that finds it a little off during the animated cutscenes? Regardless, during this cutscene we learned that the Clockwerk parts had already been stolen, after which we watched Sly make his getaway, and I have to say the intro stage to Sly 2 might just be one of the best intro stages I have ever played. It did the whole Uncharted escape from something gameplay scene all the way back in 2004. It's just so cool watching this gang be, well, a gang, and the live action scene with Murray driving the van to pick you up as you run across the rooftops was awesome too. After the gang escapes, they slowly identify each member of the Klaww Gang, who apparently possess one or two Clockwerk parts that they use in various illegal ways to make money. And that's basically the plot. Sly and the gang move from hub world to hub world, stealing the Clockwerk parts as they get to them. And that about covers the plot essentially, so the gameplay. Unfortunately, after that amazing intro stage, the game's pace slows down to a crawl, and it's all thanks to the way this game is structured. This game is nothing like the first game in terms of structure. The first game had rather small hub worlds for each of the Fiendish 5. Hub worlds that contained entrances to a range of diverse stages. In Sly 2, however, you get a bigger hub world when compared to the first game, but the majority of events of that entire episode, of which there are 8, take place in that hub world. Keep in mind, each episode takes about 2 hours to finish. Why is that a problem? Well, the lack of diverse scenery along with unpleasant backtracking makes playing this game feel like a chore sometimes, especially considering how long this game is. This game is not 2 times longer than the first game, it's actually 3 times longer than Sly 1. Where Sly 1 takes about 6 hours to beat, give or take an hour, Sly 2 on the other hand could take up to 15 hours, give or take an hour. Now that wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the backtracking or the fact that across the game's 8 episodes, you'll essentially be doing the same thing in a lot of the tasks, whether it be stealing keys from guards, stealing keys from guards, and stealing keys from guards.
It's not gonna take me long to lighten these guys of their keys.
I would hope so. You've been doing that this entire game. Furthermore, considering the fact that the events of the game take place in the hub world, you would think that Sucker Punch would put in more effort to polish the hub world. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I don't know if this is because of the clarity achieved thanks to the HD version, but the game does suffer from pretty obvious texture pop-in. This doesn't really bother me much, but I can imagine it bothering some people. Now, there's something I need to stress. When I first started the game, I made a habit of collecting all the clue bottles in a hub world before actually starting the missions. Well, what can I say? I am an ability whore, and yes, the clue bottles are back and they have been made worse, unfortunately. The clue bottles are only available in the hub worlds, and since there are 8 episodes, then that means there are only 8 clue bottle abilities to be found. The rest can be purchased. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, by the time I got all the clue bottles, I was already sick of that hub world, because some of those clue bottles can seriously go themselves. While traversing the hub world is easy enough, it is not, however, fast enough. Finding the majority of clue bottles is easy, but it's always that remaining 1 or 2 clue bottles that will make you run around the hub world 2 to 3 times until you find them, or not. It causes the same frustration I would assume that the people who don't know how to play the treasure hunting stages in Sonic Adventure 2 feel. You know, not using all the hints that are provided to them in combination with the radar, and then complaining that the stages are taking too long.
Hey, to be fair to us, the hints can get pretty cryptic in the game, and you need to know the level layout.
Cryptic? Yeah, highest place. Who can figure out that geometry?
Let it go.
At least in Sonic Adventure 2, you had a radar. In Sly Cooper, you just have to look. And to be fair to the game, you don't need to get the clue bottles to beat the game, nor are the clue bottles the only way to get character upgrades in this game. You can buy most thanks to Bentley in the safe house. Just saying that when you make the most exciting part of the first game be a chore in the sequel, then you're doing something wrong. In my opinion, Sly 2 should have handled character upgrades the same way that Sonic Adventure did, where you were able to find character upgrades in the hub worlds. In Sonic Adventure, for example, where there were multiple playable characters, the hub world would contain an upgrade that only the character it's meant for would be able to get. Like how you need Sonic's Lightspeed Dash to get the blue ring or Tails' flight to get his abilities. Speaking of Sonic,
That's the Chaos Emerald!
It all starts with this. A jewel containing the ultimate power.
power?
What power?
Power of voodoo.
Voodoo?
You do.
Sly 2 could have done the same thing, have some character upgrades be only attainable using Bentley's hacking or Murray's physical strength in the hub world. Anyway, the point is that getting the clue bottles made the missions in the hub world dull to do. And only when midway through the game I decided to just focus on the story and ignore the clue bottles did the game get much better. Not to mention that the story got a lot better too. The second half of Sly 2 is really something. Anyway, one last thing regarding the upgrades is that this time, unlike the first game, you have an ability energy meter. If the meter runs out, you can no longer use your abilities. And while that may seem like it would be a bigger problem than it is, since there really isn't any way to recover your ability meter besides retreating to the safe house, it really isn't all that big of a deal. I rarely found myself stressing over it. Speaking of meters, yes, this time around Sly has a health meter. Thank freaking god. The way the first game did things wasn't bad, but this is so much better. Not to mention that enemies drop health pickups once you beat them to death. Though sometimes the RNG with that can make enemies not drop health pickups when you really need it. Anyway, my last annoyance with the mission structure, aside from the repeated missions and the hub worlds that can get pretty dull, thanks to the fact that there are missions that can only be done using specific characters, note that I'm not talking about how the characters control here. I am talking about the fact that if I finish a stage with Sly before I can play a stage with Bentley, I need to go all the way back to the safe house, switch characters, and then go all the way back to the mission location. And this can eat up a lot of time, which makes me simply save, exit back to the start menu, and then load the game back up again. Because the game then loads up in the safe house where I can choose the character I want to play as, and then go to the mission. The game does not have an instant go back to the safe house option. This might sound like a trivial thing, but here's the thing. The game is 15 hours, and trust me, those minutes add up. What I don't get is that in some of the missions, when you start them, the other characters sometimes show up to help you. Now, why couldn't it happen this way? Where I would show up to a Bentley mission as Sly, at which point Bentley shows up and says something like, I got this. That said, the nice thing is that even if the guards are chasing you, you can still start a mission by simply getting to it. If Sly was made nowadays, the developers would most likely ask you to lose the alert status before you could proceed with the mission, in an attempt to make the game more realistic. Anyway, speaking of the multiple playable characters...
What? Something wrong?
Oh, nothing. Anyway, again, speaking of the multiple playable characters, here's what I have to say about them. Sly 2 sets the gold standard on how multiple playable characters should be in a game. All the characters are reasonably fast, all the characters can do basic platforming tasks, and all the characters can defend themselves. You never feel like you are at a major disadvantage when you are using any of the characters, whether it be in a mission or in the hub world, with the only exception to that being those blue sparkly things that only Sly can use. Because you need to be a master thief to be able to use them. However, this master thief seems to sometimes lack common sense of direction. This is very rare, but it does happen, and it's annoying. Other than that, the characters are pretty much perfect, if only Spyro 3 was this way. Anyway, regarding the upgrades in the game, the entire gang has purchasable upgrades, whether it be Bentley gaining this air booster that lasts for a good while, or the ability to break the sound barrier. Murray's upgrades tend to be on the melee side, which means unlike the rest of the characters where you kinda have to sneak around, Murray simply beats the hell out of everyone that stands in his way. That said, while I did not unlock all his abilities, he does get a high jump that makes platforming easier, and speaking about upgrades, those things can get expensive. Yes, I'm near the end of the game and I still have all those to buy, but I don't have money. So be careful which abilities you buy, and while playing the game, rob every enemy you see as well as steal any artifact in your way. Trust me, you're gonna need the money if you want to get most of the upgrades. Or you know, you could go for those godforsaken clue bottles. In any case, after nothing happens in the plot for a couple of episodes aside from the memorable Dimitri, I swear the first of the Klaww Gang was for some reason the most memorable character in the game for me. But anyway, I like how each episode starts with this cartoon title card that looks like something right from a Scooby-Doo episode. Speaking of which, when does the plot get good? Well, right around the end of episode 4, when Sly and Murray get captured by the Contessa, a spider who works for this game's version of Interpol. Left alone, it is now Bentley's job to prison break his friends out of, well, prison. And I gotta say, watching Bentley set up and sit in the safe house alone as he looks to where his friends were gonna sit is like the most heartbreaking thing ever. Oh, that's so sad and adorable. Though I do think it's important to note that it was in this episode where I decided to just ignore collecting the clue bottles and only get the ones I see. And by doing that, I'm not sure if it was the plot hitting its high note or what, but I did enjoy the game a lot more. Speaking of high notes, while the mundane tasks you will often need to do during the episode takes away from the game, almost every beginning of every episode as well as the heists, and including the setup for the next episode, is exciting, well written, and simply top notch. The calm conversations during gameplay, how exactly is it better than Sly 1? Most of the time, even by the time you're like 6 hours in, the characters will still explain to you how to perform basic moves. Like press the circle button to do this, and the remaining time will be them just telling you the plan without any jokes or anything. It's just plain English. It's not bad, but it's not entertaining either. It does get better in the second half of the game though. Man, everything about the game gets better in the second half. If only the first half of the game was the same. I mean, the setup for the heists, the grunt work can obviously not be as exciting as the heists itself, but I don't know. I feel like it was at points a little more tedious than it should have been. If only most of the planning did not take place in the hub world.
Perhaps later you and I might share a dance, Miss
Fox. Carmelita Fox. And I accept.
That job completed is how every guy reacts whenever he successfully gets a girl's phone number. Next up, gameplay-wise, are the different minigames, and if you guys remember, I mentioned that while I did not mind the minigames in the first game, I just found the difficulty balancing to be a little off. And I'm happy to report that they nailed it in Sly 2. The difficulty of the minigames in this game are damn near perfect, and they are changed up enough to not feel repetitive, and thanks to the different characters actually being fun to play as, this game generally provides a solid, fun gameplay experience. Now regarding the story, after Bentley frees the gang and Sly frees Carmelita,
No, you horrible eight-legged cow!
we head up to our next destination, Canada. Oh, Canada! I heard that that's not really their national anthem, it's just that most people think it is. Well, foreigners, like me. In Canada, our next target is called Jean Bison, which, this might be a dumb thing to say, but isn't it bison, not bison? But anyway, this is where I actually stopped playing the game as a kid, because, I was really eager to play Sly 3, and I had both games at around the same time, and I had already at this point spent 10 hours at the game, and I was like, I have to play Sly 3. I mean, I want to see what's new in that game. So I never beat it, and this is where I stopped. I mean, when I was a kid, I wasn't used to playing these type of games that last this long. I mean, I was used to the length of Spyro 1 and Crash Bandicoot, 3 to 4 hours, not 15. But on that topic, actually speaking about Bison, Bison, or however you call it. I know I usually talk about the soundtrack at the end of the review, but since I already mentioned Spyro, I figure I might as well talk about it. The theme for the Jean Bison hub world sounds like it would fit perfectly in a Spyro game. As for the rest of the soundtrack, well, it didn't really leave that much of an impression on me, because again, most of the missions take place in the hub world. And the hub worlds in the game have an atmospheric soundtrack, and while fun to listen to during the game, it's not exactly high energy stuff. The first game had more pronounced stage music in my opinion.
That's a good plan. Just don't get caught too. I don't want to be alone again.
Aww. Upon beating Jean Bison, well, I suppose now is as good of a time as any to talk about the boss fights. And well, I'm hesitant to say that they are better than the first game. They ranged from very good to simply being passable. I really enjoyed the fight with Rajan as Murray, and my favorite fight was probably fighting Jean Bison as Bentley. But the bosses Sly got to fight were, well, they were fine. I was just disappointed that they did not take advantage of Sly's platforming abilities. They were straight up dodge and hit the enemy. The boss that they did mess up was the final boss. I swear, for the love of God, this has to rank up with being one of the most annoying bosses I have ever faced. Much like Sonic 2's final boss, where you often hear the statement, "It's not that bad once you know what to do," this boss may or may not have you rip your hair out. In the boss fight, you ride a chopper with Carmelita, and you need to fire at Clockwerk until he dies. Yeah, Clockwerk was put back together after the pieces you guys been stealing got stolen from you. Anyway, midway during the fight, he will fire these circular rings at you that are electrified. Once they go through you, they damage you. At first, like all the things he kept firing at me, I thought that I needed to keep hitting it until I destroyed it, because that's literally what you do to every projectile he launches at you. So when I kept hitting it and it wasn't getting destroyed, I figured that I wasn't hitting it enough. So I kept trying and trying and trying to no avail. And you want to know how it was supposed to be done? You were supposed to hit the sides of the ring only once, and that would cause the electricity to switch inside out. After beating the final boss, Clockwerk tries to kill the gang because, you know, if you can't beat the protagonist, might as well take his friends to hell with you. And thanks to this, we play a pretty badass mid-air platforming action sequence that made my hands sweat, seeing as I have a fear of heights. And when we get to Clockwerk, just like the first game, we beat the hell out of that thing, after which it crashes into the Paris River. You know, I've been to the Eiffel Tower. Alone. After that water landing, the gang decides to destroy Clockwerk from the inside, which means that we are going to play this little section that requires each of the characters' special trait. Murray's strength, Sly's agility, and Bentley's hacking, and after— Oh! Thankfully, they did not kill off Bentley, he just got a broken leg. Nonetheless, the ending that followed was an emotional one. You can physically see the gang in this exhausted state. Reminded me of that oven sequence in MGS4. Anyway, Carmelita shows up and Sly offers to go peacefully if she lets his friends go. And seeing as the gang helped her numerous times throughout the game, she agreed, and what followed honestly made the entire journey to the ending worth it.
She began to relax, and we got to talking. We spoke freely about our previous adventures, comparing notes and even getting in a few laughs. Then we started talking about, well, everything. Books, music, art. It was like we were on a first date. She even showed me the bottle she'd been saving for the special occasion of my arrest. My heart sank when she realized that our short flight across town had already taken 2 hours, a fact I kinda clued into after seeing the Eiffel Tower float by 17 times. She went forward to ask the pilot what was up, and it looked like my pals had left me a little going-away present before taking off. Floating away on the night breeze, I could faintly make out Carmelita's voice.
I'll find you, Cooper!
I love how during their talk the photos showed what Sly's version is to listening to music and appreciating art. It was just the most adorable thing ever, and following that we get the credits as well as where all the members of the Klaww Gang are now. And that was Sly 2 Bad the Thieves. I know I could have gone deeper into the story, but I did not want to spoil everything, even though I spoke about the ending. But anyway, so while the game can be slow at times, in fact I can imagine the padding boring a lot of people, if the game was a few hours shorter, then I could totally see it being on the list of being one of the best games of all time. But as it stands to me, Sly 2 is a great game. So, I mean, when it hits those high notes, it just screams.